I didn't like the preacher that came up behind me in the line I was standing in. I know what you're thinking. I'm supposed to like everyone, but I will tell you this particular individual. I had been sent on a particular task. My wife and I, along with others, we were at North American Youth Congress, the event that happened back in July. And she had asked me to go get her a cup of coffee before the service began. And so I was standing in line at one of the vendors there, minding my own business, when he from behind me started up the conversation. "So where are you from, buddy?" And I turned around and said, "Well, I'm from Brownsville, Texas." "Well, what do you do there?" And it is then I said, "Well, I pastor a church. I pastor New Life Brownsville." That's when he went into his tirade. He started talking about, "Oh, the church is lost, it's hellbound, it's heartsick." Turns out, unfortunately, he is an evangelist, that he speaks at different churches every weekend. "I'll wake them up," he growled. "Christians are asleep. They don't pray, they don't love, they don't care." With that pronouncement, he took on his kind of preaching tone and his preaching cadence and started listing all of the things that were wrong, all of the weaknesses of the church. The people are too lazy, they're too rich, too spoiled, too spiritually fat. The people around us are hearing the conversation that is going on, and I'm sure by then my face was already starting to turn red. I probably shouldn't have let it bother me, but it did. I am one of those individuals that never knows what to say in the moment. At that particular moment when all of that was happening, I was speechless. But then afterwards, I have all of these great things, these great statements. "Oh, I wished I would have said that," or "I wished I would have responded with this." And as I was working on this lesson, I spent some time thinking about this particular individual, this evangelist. And here's what I wished I would have said: that God's faithfulness has never depended on the faithfulness of his children. You see, God is faithful even when you and I are not. When you and I are fearful and we lack courage, God isn't fearful. God has made a history out of using people in spite of people. If we needed an example, I believe John chapter 6 gives us one. It's the feeding of the 5,000. It is a miracle that is recorded in all four Gospels. Why did all four writers think it worth repeating? Maybe they knew some evangelists or preachers like the one that was behind me in the coffee line. Perhaps they wanted to show how God doesn't give up even when his people do. You see, in John 6, the day begins with the news of the death of John the Baptist. If you remember, John the Baptist he is first cousins with Jesus, and we find that no doubt Jesus is troubled when he finds this news out, because he and John had a relationship of ministry together. They understood one another. And so as you read down through John chapter 6, it continues with the return of the disciples. They have been on their missionary journey. Remember, Jesus had sent them out, giving them power over disease and over all sickness. Lay hands on them, pray for them, cast out devils and demons, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And the disciples returned with great joy, testifying of all the things that had happened and transpired in their missionary journey. And what is interesting is, following these disciples are some 5,000 men along with their families. Jesus, he tries to slip away, kind of get away from the crowd and cross over the sea because he's wanting to be by himself, only to find a crowd waiting for him on the other side. Jesus is wanting a time to mourn, maybe in solitude because of the death of his cousin John the Baptist, but instead he is surrounded by people. Maybe he wanted to spend some time with just his disciples, but instead He is in the midst of a crowd. He wanted time to think, but instead he has people that he has to face. And so Jesus, being who he is, spends time teaching them. And in the process of teaching them, he discovers there's this need. And so he turns to Phillip and he asks, where can we buy enough bread for all of these people to eat? Now, how does Philip respond? If you read the account of it in the 6th chapter of John, unfortunately, he sounds just like that preacher I met in the coffee line. He knows the problem, but he has no clue as to the solution. In fact, John chapter 6, verse 7, it says, we would all have to work a month to buy enough bread for each person to have a little piece. He can cite the stats, but he can't see how to help. He can crunch the numbers. Philip can begin counting and calculating how many people are out in that crowd, but he cannot construct the answer. And though the answer to prayer is standing right next to him, he doesn't even pray. Equally disturbing is the silence of the other disciples. You might wonder, well, were the other disciples, were they optimistic? We read in Mark's writing that no one lives in this place. That's what the disciples said. We're in a desert place. It's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the countryside and the towns around here to buy themselves something to eat. That was the disciples' solution to the problem. You know, sometimes we look at the disciples and we think, my goodness, just a little bit of faith. If they would have had just a little bit of faith, they could have turned to Jesus. You can feed them, Jesus. No challenge is too great for you. You sent us out with authority and power, and when we went out, we saw the sick recover and we raised the dead. We know you can heal the sick and raise the dead. We know you could feed the crowd. But that's not what they said. It never occurred to the disciples to turn the problem over to Jesus. Only Andrew, Peter's brother, had such a thought, but even his faith was small. John chapter 6, verse 9, Andrew, he says, here is a boy with 5 loaves of barley bread, 2 little fish, but that is not enough for so many people. Andrew, at least, he comes to Jesus with an idea, but he doesn't come with much faith. In fact, one would be hard-pressed to find much faith on the hill that day. Philip, he was cynical. Andrew was doubtful. The other disciples, they were negative. The preacher I met would have felt right at home with these guys. He could have joined in talking about these disciples like he was the church. They're not praying, they're fat, they're lazy, they're not believing, they're not even seeking a solution. Mark would say to us that if they are doing anything, they are telling Jesus what to do. Send the people away. And so we could say, just like that evangelist told me, I think these disciples are hell-bound, heartsick. I think they're spoiled. Let me be clear. Just for a moment, let me state something that I did agree with to some extent about the condition of the church. The church is weak. When he spoke about the condition of the saints and the health of the church, I don't argue. We're human beings. That's what makes up the church. The church is not perfect. But when he began to proclaim that we're going to hell in a handbasket, I don't agree with that at all. I disagree with that. I simply think God is greater than our weaknesses. I think it is our weaknesses that reveals how great God is. In fact, he told the Apostle Paul, who was struggling at the time, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, God spoke to Paul and said, when you are weak, my power is made perfect in you. The feeding of the 5,000 is an ideal example. The scene answers the question, what does God do when his children are weak? If God ever needed an excuse to give up on people, he has one right there that day when the disciples are saying, send them away, send them back. Surely God is going to banish these followers until they learn to believe. But that's not what Jesus does. The disciples are filled with all of this unbelief, this negativity, this doubt, and Jesus could have just been done with it, washed his hands, dusted them off, and said, I'm done. But that's not what he does. We read it here, John chapter 6, verse 11. Then Jesus took the loaves of bread, thanked God for them, gave them to the people who were sitting there. He did the same with the fish, giving as much as the people wanted. When the disciples didn't pray, Jesus prayed. When the disciples didn't see God at work, Jesus sought God and gave thanks unto God. When the disciples were weak, Jesus was strong. When the disciples had no faith, Jesus had faith. He thanked God. For what? What did Jesus bless and give thanks for? Was it the crowd? Was it the weariness? Was it the faithless disciples? No. He thanked God for the basket of bread, and he thanked God for the fish. And look what Jesus does next. Matthew gives it to us in his writing. Jesus divided the bread, gave it to his followers, who gave it to the people. Rather than punish the disciples, he employs them. He hires them. He tells them, go, pass out the bread. Pass out the bread you didn't even request. Enjoy the answer to the prayer that you didn't even pray. If Jesus would have acted according to the faith of his disciples, the multitude would have gone unfed. But Jesus, he didn't do that. You see, God is true to us even when we forget him. God's blessings are given according to the riches of his grace, not according to the depth of our faith. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13, if we are not faithful, he will still be faithful, because he cannot be false to himself. Why is that important to know? So you will not become distrustful. Look around you. Let's be honest. There are more mouths than there are bread. There are more wounds than there are physicians. There are more who need the truth than those who tell the truth. And there are churches that, yes, they are asleep. More churches are asleep than churches that are on fire. So what do? Do we throw up our hands and walk away? Do we tell the world we can't help them? That's what the disciples wanted to do that day. Should we just give up on the church? That seemed to be the approach of the evangelists I met. No, never. We don't give up. We look up. We look up unto the Lord. We look up to the King of glory. We trust him. We believe in him. Our optimism is not shallow. It's not hollow. Jesus has proven worthy. He has shown that he never fails. Though there is nothing but failure in us, God is always faithful. I will probably never see that proclaimer of pessimism again, but maybe you will. Or maybe you will meet someone like him. And if you do, will you give him a message for me? God is faithful, even when his children are not. That's what makes God, God. Well, I hope you have a great time tonight discussing and going through the questions and just interacting with one another. I want you to see God in every circumstance. Even when you and I are at our worst, God is at his best. Have a great time of discussion. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I look forward to sharing another lesson with you next week. God bless.